Hi, Assalamualaikum and greetings to all. So this is going to be our last video for the semester, and this is the revision video for the final examination. So basically for our course, Culture and Development, we studied two major aspects in our life, culture and development. So first we're going to look at everything about culture, all the critical concepts that we have learned so far. So let's have a look at culture first. Ladies and gentlemen, culture is the way of life, which includes costumes, rituals, practices, language, arts, food, everything. If you look at a building, it's also part of culture. If you look at a painting, it's also part of culture. If you look at a bridge, for example, it's also part of culture actually. So all sorts of ways of life, ladies and gentlemen, so that's culture. Now, some of you may realize that I mentioned a bridge just now. Some of you may say that why not a bridge is a development? Ladies and gentlemen, there's a huge and very massive link between culture and development, and I will talk about it at the end of this video. So in terms of culture itself, we have a lot of critical concepts along the way that we have learned. So let's first look at cultural relativism. Basically, cultural relativism is the fact that you cannot judge others based on your own values. You just compare and you judge silently. You do not take action. So that's cultural relativism. And then we learn about cultural determinism. So basically, your behaviors, our behaviors, are dictated by the events, behaviors, or actions in the past. So for example, if you see someone attending a kenduri kahwin for a Malay wedding, you expect the lady to wear baju kurung. So if that someone comes with jeans and kebaya, you will feel awkward and strange about how the lady dresses herself because it's not the norm. Because based on past events, everybody comes with baju kurung. Now the same goes to cultural relativism. For example, if you see a tribe or a race in Sarawak, for example, where they actually practice cutting or chopping the head of the enemy. So for you, you feel that that is so uncivilized. But for them, it's very important, the cutting or the chopping of the head of the enemy, to show or to illustrate or to demonstrate that they have come to maturity, especially for the gentlemen. So basically, you cannot judge whatever that they do based on your values. So that's cultural relativism and determinism. And then this concept, I believe that you have also learned this in other courses this semester, cultural ethnocentrism. Basically, you believe that you are superior than other people. You believe that your culture is the best. So that's cultural ethnocentrism. And there are three characteristics of this cultural ethnocentrism. The first one, when you talk about ethnocentric people, they normally click together because this attitude bond them. So it contributes to social solidarity. The second characteristic is the fact that familiar expectations among members is a must. So if you do something out of the ordinary, then you'll not be considered in the group. And the third one is the fact that you will think of other different behaviors as strange. You will not be able to accept the fact that there are people with differences because they have different backgrounds. So very importantly that you understand three characteristics of this cultural ethnocentrism. Next, another critical concept that we learn, layers of cultures. So basically we have 6 layers of cultures. We have national, we have regional. Now regional, for example, between Malaysia and Singapore and the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Brunei. So that's regional. And national is whatever that we have here in Malaysia per se, that everybody actually accepts as the national culture. And then we have gender. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we only have 2 genders, male and female. And then we have generation. For example, you, a younger generation. And then we have myself, the middle generation. And then we have the older generation. And then we have social class. Now, social class refers to, for example, where you live, or the education background, or the fact that between you and the royalties. So that's social class. And last but not least, the corporate layer of culture. So what this means is the fact that for UPNM, for example, we have our own corporate culture, which is different from UKM or from UTM. So 6 layers of culture in order for you to understand how society functions. And then we also learn about national culture, local culture, as well as popular cultures. So if you look at national culture, as I said just now, whatever is accepted by people of the country. So practices that are accepted and used by all. For example, baju kurung and baju Melayu, they are considered baju kebangsaan. And then we have local culture, practices in a particular culture or community only. For example, sari, only worn by Indian ladies. Now, if let's say sari wants to be adopted as one of the national cultures, then it must follow one of the elements or one of the aspects in the national cultural policy. So, if let's say it becomes Sharia compliance, now sari will lose its identity. So, I believe that sometimes there are things that are better left as at the local culture, and sometimes there are things that can be adopted as national culture. And then we talk about popular culture. Now, ladies and gentlemen, popular culture, there are practices or rituals based on trends. For example, K-pop costumes, K-pop makeup was very popular, I think 5 years ago. And then when I was a student, the most popular trend was Bollywood. So popular culture keeps changing. So you have to understand that. And then when you talk about having to adapt yourself, to assimilate yourself, we have 2 other concepts, critical concepts. Okay? And these concepts are, the first one is what we call cultural assimilation. So what is cultural assimilation? Basically, it resembles the dominant cultures in terms of language, behaviors, or the way you dress. And the period or the time frame that you need is just a very short period of time for cultural assimilation. And the second one is what we call cultural adaptation. So in order for you to become a new part of a new culture, then you have to adapt yourself. And this process takes a long time in order for you to achieve that adaptation. So for cultural assimilation and cultural adaptation, they are very critical in one's life. in your life, in my life, and it can happen many times. For example, when I was a secondary student, I was in a boarding school. So when I joined the school from Form 1, I had to assimilate, I had to adapt myself in terms of the boarding school culture. And then when I moved to university, again, I have to assimilate myself. I have to adapt myself to a university lifestyle. And again, when I got into working environments, when I started a new job, I have to assimilate, I have to adapt. And when you got married, for example, you have to assimilate, you have to adapt to the new culture, because basically your husband and you yourself will have different cultures at home. So you have to assimilate, adapt so that you can live together. So basically, cultural assimilation and cultural adaptation does not come only one time. It can happen many times. So that's cultural assimilation and cultural adaptation. Now, let's have a look at keys to understanding. So, what are the keys to understanding? In this life, in your life, in my life, you will always meet different types of people. They come from different background, they come from different states and maybe different countries. So what you need to do, these 3 keys to understanding, will actually help you to avoid miscommunication. So the first key is respect. You have to respect other people. You have to respect people around you. So you respect others' opinions, practices, values. Very important. And then you have to tolerate them. You must have tolerance. So basically, you give and take. You give something to other people, you take something from other people. So it should be a balanced process. You cannot just take and take and take without giving. That's why there's a lot of misunderstanding, because there's some sort of imbalance kind of process. And last but not least is accept or acceptance. You accept other people as a whole. You value the bad as well as the good things about other people. And if you actually have respect, tolerance, and acceptance towards other people around you, I do believe that miscommunication can be avoided. Simply because you try to understand them, you give and take, you respect them, and you accept them as a whole. You cannot just accept, oh, I just want to accept the good things about the good behaviors of my friend. The bad part or the bad attitudes, I do not want to accept. So when your friends are having a tantrum, for example, having a moody day, you avoid him or her. That's wrong. You, as a friend, should talk to him or her and ask him or her, so what's the problem? Maybe we can share. Maybe I can help. So those are acceptance. So keys to understanding in order to avoid miscommunication, respect, tolerance, as well as acceptance. So 3. Now, let's have a look at ICT as well as cultures. Now, some of you may feel that how can ICT influence cultures, or how can cultures influence ICT? Actually, there's a great linkage between these two. So if you talk about ICT and cultures, first we are going to look at the impacts or the effects of ICT on cultures. The first one is actually global village. Simply because you have technology, You don't have to travel to New Zealand, for example, in order to witness or experience how New Zealanders live. So you can just watch YouTube or documentary, and then some of them have this some sort of 3D experience, 4D experience. So you get absorbed in the process. So that's global village. So you'll be able to learn. And because of that, there will be no boundaries. No boundaries because you can travel anywhere, anytime. There's no time zone. There's no limit as long as you have the internet access. So that's the effects of ICT on cultures. However, we also have challenges. There are two challenges basically. The first one is, how do you preserve your cultural heritages? As I said, because you can travel through the internet, you can learn a lot of things through the internet. And how do you actually preserve your culture? Because there will be a mixture and adaptation and assimilation. Because let's say you watch a video on a Korean culture, for example. You fall in love with how they dress, and because of that, you change yourself to follow the Korean culture. So how do you preserve this? And the second challenge is also about maintaining your language and identity. Once you have actually changed the way you dress, then of course your identity will be lost. So those are the two challenges. And of course, I'm not saying that ICT is bad on cultures, but most importantly, how we actually take ICT and how we use it for our benefits. That's the most important thing. Okay. Now, we also learn under culture, we learn about persuasive communication. So when you want to persuade, when you want to influence other people, you have to consider three things. First, you must be able to identify who your audience is. Number two, the types of media that you want to use in order to share information, very important. And the third one, your communication, when you want to persuade other people, you must depend on these three categories of cultures. High versus low context culture, sequential versus synchronic cultures, as well as affective versus neutral cultures. Now, let's have a look at this pair individually. First, we look at high context culture versus low context culture. Now, high context culture, basically they are from Malaysia, for example, the eastern part of the world. And people in these high contact cultures, they emphasize interpersonal relationships. They always want to develop trust, and the characteristics, collectivists, they prefer group harmony, and they actually prefer to do things collectively, and they do not want to do things individually. So that's high contact cultures. In comparison to that, low context culture, basically people from the West, they are more logical, they are more linear, individualistic, and action-oriented. So people from the low context culture, they value logics, facts, and directness. So when you speak to them, speak directly. And solving a problem means that you will actually put up all the facts and you will evaluate one after the other. And very importantly, after you have completed the discussion, it will actually be followed by actions. So that's low context cultures people, or people from the low context cultures. So that's one pair. The second pair is sequential versus synchronic culture. So sequential cultures mean that people, they value time, they see time as a commodity, and most importantly, they perform tasks one at a time. For example, people in this sequential culture, they will have a timetable, a schedule. So let's say today from 8 to 9, they will be doing a homework. So 9 to 10, they will eat. So let's say the homework is not yet complete. They will just stop at 9. And then 9 to 10, they take the meal. So they have their lunch or maybe breakfast. So they will follow timetable specifically because they value time. And if you notice, people from the sequential culture, they are always action oriented, and they follow timetable exactly because they want to achieve the outcome. People from synchronic cultures, on the other hand, are multitasked. So, what does it mean by multitasking or multitask? Basically, people from synchronic cultures, they can perform various tasks, or 1 or 2 or 3 tasks at one time, or concurrently, or at the same time. So, for example, while watching a movie, someone can also read a storybook, and at the same time, he or she can also answer messages on the mobile phones. So, people from synchronic cultures, basically, they just enjoy time, and they do not look at time as a commodity. So the task of watching, of doing the homework, of performing any actions can be longer than expected, simply because they are doing a lot of things at the same time. Last pair is affective culture versus neutral culture. So basically, people in affective cultures, they are good and not shy to show their real emotions. So they can cry in front of people, they can actually yell in front of people. So they are not afraid to show that these are the feelings that they have now. In comparison to that, people from the neutral cultures, they are not able to share and to show their emotions in front of other people. But that doesn't mean that they are not capable of feeling sad. It's just that they do not show that in front of people. So who knows, when they go back, when they are alone in their room, if they are sad, they will cry. But they will never cry in front of other people. So that's how neutral culture works and function. And then we are going to look at, I believe, persuasion therapy. So this is under persuasive communication and persuasion therapy. What does it mean by persuasion therapy? It's the fact that how you actually treat yourself when you have problem. So basically, persuasion therapy is very culture specific. So when you say culture specific, you have to look at whether the people come from high or low context culture, whether they are from whether they are from sequential culture or synchronic culture, or whether they are from affective or neutral culture. So all this will play important role in terms of persuasion therapy. And last but not least, I believe that this is the last critical concept, is tangible versus intangible cultures. So tangible cultures, they are cultures that you can see and you can touch. And there are two categories of tangible cultures: movable cultures and immovable cultures. So basically, what do they mean? Movable cultures, basically, they are things that you can move. For example, chairs or baju kurung. So that's tangible cultures, tangible, movable cultures. And then we have immovable cultures. For example, a building, the Parliament building, for example. It's a tangible culture, but you cannot move it because it's there. It's huge. It's heavy. You cannot move it. So tangible cultures, ladies and gentlemen, they are cultures that you can see, you can touch. Now, on the other hand, intangible cultures, they are cultures that you can see sometimes and experience and feel, but you cannot touch. So for example, if you're talking about events, if you're talking about a birthday celebration, so you can see the birthday celebration, you can feel the birthday celebration, you can experience it, but you cannot touch. You cannot touch the birthday celebration. I'm not talking about the people who attend the birthday celebration, but the event itself, the celebration itself, you cannot touch. And sometimes, for example, for Muslims, if you pray, so although it's not basically part of culture, it's a ritual. You cannot touch, and you cannot actually, of course you are praying, you touch yourself, but I'm talking about you cannot touch the fact that the ritual that you do. And you can see people praying, and if you are Muslims yourself, you can experience it, but you cannot touch it. And very importantly, for both tangible as well as intangible cultures, they give identity and mark groups of people. So if you're talking about the Parliament building, then it gives the identity of a democracy country for Malaysia. If you look at a girl wearing baju kurung, then you know that she's from Malaysia. Not necessarily Malay, because remember, baju kurung is the national costume, so all races can wear baju kurung. So both tangible as well as intangible cultures give identity and mark groups of people. So that's all about culture. Let's move on to development. Now, I will talk about the national cultural policy after we have completed all critical aspects or concepts under development. So basically, what is development? Development is a positive or a negative improvement. So this is the definition, and everybody must be aware of this. And when you talk about development, we will look at different aspects of development for this revision. And all of you have actually looked and explored all this. So there are two categories of development. The first one is development as process. So what do you mean by development as process is when you create something new or modify or destroy old ones. So that's the definition of development as process. And there are two subcategories of development as process. The first one is development as easy, and the definition is from 0 to something, and maybe from not having a phone to having a landline phone. And the second subcategory is development as modernity. The definition is from you have something and then it becomes better. For example, just now you're talking about having from not having a phone to having a landline phone. So now from having a landline phone to smartphones. So that's development as modernity. And the second category of development is what we call as development as intention. And when you talk about development as intention, it actually looks at development requires purposes, must have objectives, must have purposes, and development needs policies. So whatever development that you want to have, it must follow a policy at least. So there are three subcategories under development as intention. The first one is development as control. So basically, you have to control the development. Some people say that yes, we have to have development, but you have to control any types of development. And you will control in terms of people, financial, as well as security. And the second subcategory is development as empowerment. So basically, you must give power to people. And how do you do this? You have schools, for example, you have university. So you are giving the people the power. And as you know, the power comes because you have the knowledge. And the third one is development as discourse. So basically, when policies are discussed and approved in the parliament. So pardon me, I'm so sorry, there's no number 4. So it's basically when policies are discussed and approved in the parliament. So ladies and gentlemen, beware. There's only 3 subcategories, so there's no number 4. Approved is actually a continuation after N. So basically, when you talk about development as discourse, when you talk about writing a policy, you have to debate the policy. You have to make sure that the politicians understand the policy. And once they have approved the policy, so people can use it for any types of development relevant to the kind of policies that are being approved. So that's on development as process as well as development as intention. So I would like to repeat, development as process has 2 subcategories, development as easy and development as modernity. And development as intention has 3 subcategories, development as control, development as empowerment, as well as development as discourse. Now, let's move on to trends in development. So when you talk about trends in development, you are actually looking at what happened before the 1990s and what happened after the 1990s. So there are 6 pairs of what happened before and after the 1990s. And why 1990s? Because after the 1990s, the Cold War ended. So a lot of things have changed. For example, the USSR, has released several smaller nations or countries to become independent nations or to become independent countries. And because of that, we use this as a reference before and after the Cold War. So basically the first pair is before the 1990s singular and after is plural. Before the 1990s is Eurocentrism and after polycentrism. Before the 1990s generalizing and after differentiating. Before the 1990s macrostructure and after agency or actor orientation. Before the 1990s determinism and after contingency, and last but not least, before the 1990s structuralism and after constructivism. Now, let's have a look at what do this pair mean basically. So, for example, if you look at singular before, that means there's only one power, which was USSR. And then when you talk about after, which is plural, simply because they were more independent states from USSR. So that's why before singular, one power or one rule or one government, and then after that we have plural, we have many governments. And then if you talk about generalizing and differentiating, for example, before the 1990s, everything must be the same. So it's a generalizing. And after the 1990s, when we have more smaller states becoming independent, so they were able to differentiate or distinguish themselves from the main one, which is USSR. And the same goes to macro structure. So before the 1990s, we have just one structure, a huge structure. And then after the 1990s, they become more independent. They are able to take action. These new countries, they were able to take action on their own. And when you talk about determinism, before the 1990s, it simply means that everything is being dictated, everything's being determined by the main power, which is USSR. And after the 1990s, what happened was that you can have your own plan, you can have your own contingency plan. And when you talk about structuralism, structure must be followed before the 1990s. We are referring to the structure from the USSR. And after that, after the 1990s, after the independence, the development can be different in the sense that the developers from these smaller countries can construct their own or use their own ideas in order to perform development. And if you talk about Eurocentrism, in terms of the development itself, focuses or actually uses just the USSR, and after that it can be multiple or various style of doing things. So basically that's the difference, or that's the trends and the differences between before and after the 1990s. Now let's have a look at dimensions of development. So when you talk about development, after knowing the trends, we are now after the 1990s. So there are 7 dimensions. The first one is context. Why is it very important for you to have a context for development, simply because this context will give you the framework of your own development, will give you some sort of a direction for your development. It can be development of a house, it can be development, a child's development, or it can be a development of an economy for a particular country. So whatever it is, you must have context. So you will have a framework, you will have a direction for your development. The second dimension is explanation. Why? Why must you have the development, basically? So you must have reasons, you must have purposes, remember? Development as intention, you must have purposes. You must be able to explain why do you need a school. You must be able to explain why you must develop the economy of the country, for example. Number 3 is epistemology. So I'm so sorry here. What happened is that number 3 should be down here, okay, below. So the third one is epistemology. Epistemology is the knowledge. You must have the knowledge in order to develop something. Because let's say you want to build a house. You must have the knowledge, okay, my house will be built next to or near the beach, for example. And because of that, you need to understand where does the wind blow? From the west, from the south, because that will determine the windows, the doors and everything. So that's epistemology, that's knowledge. The fourth one, methodology. The fourth dimension is methodology. This is actually ways to develop. How do you do things, for example? For example, if we want to build a house near the beach, then wooden house would not be that appropriate. So then ways to build. So what type of woods, for example, what types of structure that you need. So all those, very important. The fifth dimension is representation. So representation is all about meaning. When you build something, you must have meaning to that something that you want to build. Let's say for the economy. So economy is based on what? Industrialized nation or agricultural nation. So that gives meaning. The sixth dimension is imagination. You must have imagination in order to develop something. So imagination refers to creativity, innovation, and the last dimension is future. You must be able to sustain the development. There's no point of building a house now and it collapses tomorrow. There's no point. So when you talk about the last dimension of development, it's about the future. How do you see the house in the next, say, 20 years? How do you see the economy of Malaysia in the next 20 years? So you will project your development based on these sustainable development strategies. And when you talk about sustainable development, what does it mean? So basically, sustainable development is a balanced development. So if you have a good school here, in other part of the nation, you must also have good schools. So it must be balanced. And let's say you have a balance or a good development for the human capital. Then you must also have a good development for the economy. You must also have a good development for the political state of the nation. You must also have a a good social development. So basically, everything must be balanced. If one is good, another is not good, then you must try to improve the one that is not good, because sustainable development, it is all about a balanced development. Now, let's have a look at, let's have a look at ICT and development. Just now we look at ICT and culture. Now we look at ICT and development. So basically, there are two effects of ICT on development. The first one is ICT facilitates development. For example, in the past, the machine that you use may be a lot of manual machines, but because we have ICT, everything can be a digital processes. And the second one, you become the creators of the development and not just users. So very importantly, two effects of ICT on development. The first one is it facilitates development, and second, you become the creators and not just users of the development. For example, nowadays we have online businesses. We have the internet. Then you can actually, sell your skills. So you become creators, and you are not just searching for something that you can use, but you become the creators. So if you notice, if you go online, you will realize that there are a lot of terms used in order to show this. One of them is content creator. So content creator is basically how ICT influences development. Because when you have the internet, you can become a content creator. Let's say you have a mobile phone, and then you have the camera, you use it for a video shooting, for example, then you create a content. Just look at the reflective report that you did for the course. So each and every one of you recorded yourself, and what happened is that you create a content, and then 5 members or 4 members come together, put it into a storyline, so it becomes another type of content. So 4 contents can be combined and compiled, and it becomes a new content. So content creator. So remember that ICT and development, and how ICT affect the development, facilitate development, and you become content creator or creator and not just user. I believe, ladies and gentlemen, the last critical concept for development is communication and development. So in order to develop understanding, it involves 3 things. The first one is communication without misunderstanding. Communication is culturally biased, and communication is to ensure all types of development happen. And if you look at, if you look here at the trends, you have 1, you have to develop communication. You're developing your own communication. And then 2, there are skills that you must have in order for you to become successful people. And the last one, you must have skills for communication, and you must have skills to communicate. So basically, these are the 3 trends when you talk about communication and development. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to go back to this one here, National Cultural Policy. So what is National Cultural Policy? It is actually a guideline to promote peace and harmony in Malaysia. And there are 3 aspects or elements of this policy. The first one, it is based on the indigenous cultures. The second one, practices from other cultures can also be accepted as long as they actually follow the third one, which is Islam is the basis for the policy. So just now we talked about sari. If sari wants to become the national culture or the national costume, then it must follow the Islamic guideline. And if, let's say, sari follows the Islamic guidelines, it will actually lose its uniqueness. So that's why I believe that it should stay as a local culture. Now, national cultural policy does not only include or does not only focus on culture per se. It also focuses on development. So if you look carefully here, if you talk about dimension of development, so whatever that you want to represent, for example, it must have meaning. Am I right? And this meaning must actually comply with this guideline. So I know that, for example, in Malacca, for example, we have some sort of building that have the influence from the Dutch and from the Portuguese. But whatever it is, it must comply with this, the national cultural policy. Anything that goes beyond or against will not be accepted. So that's why the context explanation must be relevant to all this as well. And when you talk about, for example, this one here, becoming creators, if you notice, you have to comply with the third one. Islam is the basis for the policy. And if you notice as well, there are things that you cannot talk freely. You cannot touch on religions. You cannot touch on races, simply because you can actually create misunderstanding. Sometimes from your point of view, it can be a good example or a good product, but from the majority or from the people from other races, from other religions, they may be offended. So that's why this national cultural policy can be used for culture or can be used in the discussions of culture, as well as can be used in the discussion of development. Now, before I end this video, remember at the very beginning, I talked about the link between culture and development, how actually culture influences development and how development influences culture. To simply justify or to simply put these ideas, you look at how culture influences development, look at the buildings, the design of the buildings. So if you look at some of the roof in Negeri Sembilan, the house roof, you will realize that it is from the Minangkabau influence. So that's how culture influences development. And how does development influences culture? You can simply look at coffee culture. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, coffee culture is not new. During your grandparents' days, coffee culture has already existed. But those days, they went to this coffee shop. They really talk while drinking coffee. But today, because of development, the youngsters, they go to Starbucks or Coffee Bean, for example, just to use the internet or just to show off that they have a new mobile phones or that they have a new laptop. So although they go with friends, they rarely talk to their friends. So that's how development has changed the coffee culture. So ladies and gentlemen, I believe that's the end of our revision video. If you have questions, please ask. I'm open to discussion, and I do hope that whatever that I have shared here will actually help you not only for the final examinations, but most importantly, to become good and effective citizen of Malaysia. That's all. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum and good day to all.